days.
Exactly.
So 2 weeks or 3 weeks, most of that's going to be dissipated in very low levels. Your real danger is the long half-life, like cesium-134, cesium-137, strontium-90, plutonium, which have half-lives of 29, 30 years, and plutonium 24,000 years. So we're talking about types of radiation that can ruin huge areas for hundreds, if not thousands of years, make it uninhabitable. When all of this happened in Chernobyl, and I did a rather intense study of Chernobyl many years ago, it was interesting that not only did the Soviet government cover it up, but the governments in the West tried to keep it as quiet as they could as well. And when they had helicopters measuring radiation levels and air currents, they measured only iodine-131, and they were not keeping records of the longer-lasting isotope. Later studies clearly showed that millions of square miles of Europe was contaminated with these long-lasting radioisotopes. Well, we're seeing the same thing here. They're measuring iodine-131. They're ignoring the longer isotopes, but we're picking them up in the United States in water systems, the drinking water, in the milk and the cheese. Once it enters the milk, then it's in the animal's meat, then it's in the cheese and the butter and all the things that are made, the dairy products, begin to show contamination levels. Now, these levels aren't high enough to produce acute radiation sickness or any acute effect that you're going to notice. The real danger is the long-term effects, the chronic radiation effects. Now, one of the things they've geared up to cover themselves in this event is they start putting out the stories about radiation hormesis, trying to imply that, actually low-level radiation is good for you. And I've looked at a lot of that literature and the people that were writing the articles about it. I wrote an article refuting what they said to a large degree. I said, if you have the perfect diet and the perfect genetics, then hormesis is real. But in a country like the United States where most people don't eat good diets, there's a lot of chronic illness. There's a great number of people with DNA repair defects. Hormesis is not going to protect you, and this chronic low-level radiation is going to produce a significant increase in disease. Now, one of the other things that they used to cover up the Chernobyl incident was they only measured radiation death rate. You always see quoted, well, the cancer death rate did not increase dramatically. The only significant increase was thyroid cancer, which increased 21-fold. But they always used the term cancer death rate. Well, the vast majority of people weren't dying of the cancer, but they had the cancer induced by the radiation. So for every person that died of cancer, we had thousands of cases of induced cancer that didn't die that ended up in the statistics. Now, what happens in Eastern Europe, a lot of these people died of heart failure or other disorders before they died of their cancer. So they were never listed as a cancer death.
Right.
This covers it all up. This makes it look different.
Statistical sleight of hand.
Sure.
The issue with Chernobyl was, in reporting primarily iodine-131, and you mentioned correctly, of course, the Western nations are doing the same thing. They were all basically trying to protect the nuclear industry.
Sure, and to protect their crops and their milk industry and their cheese industry, because the first thing that starts getting geared up is, well, we got to protect all of these things because people are going to be frightened and not drink the milk and not eat the cheese, and that's going to have economic impact.
Right.
So that takes precedence over the health effect.
Well, we're already protecting the dairy industry, the beef industry, big agriculture, and now we're protecting the fish industry. And when we come back in just a few minutes, I'm going to draw your attention to the newest story at Rense.com. I just put it up. and it has to do with the story of the EPA and the FDA, primarily the FDA, saying that they're not going to test Gulf of Alaska North Pacific fish because there's no need to, so they say. And I have posted the maps of the Pacific Ocean showing where the water currents flow, what their names are, and you take a look and you decide, should they or should they not test? We'll be right back with Dr. Blaylock. Okay, back with Dr. Russell Blaylock talking about the very real issue of radiation. The other thing I wanted to mention before I get into this map thing is, I'll put it right behind the map. If you go look at the top of headlines, you'll see FDA won't test Alaska fish for radiation. Don't worry, be happy. Open that page, and I just hurriedly put it together because it was very important for you to see now. Do pass it along. You'll see the first map. It shows the Oyashio current coming down from the Sea of Okhotsk and the Bering Sea, right next to the east coast of Japan off Fukushima, and the Kuroshio current going up, and they meet, and they both head east, directly across the Pacific. If you scroll down the page, you'll see the North Pacific Current, which is what they both become when they marry and run off. They head across the ocean together as the North Pacific, and then they split along about, if you go in a straight line, Washington State. Half of it goes north into the Gulf of Alaska, where it swirls and swirls and swirls counterclockwise, and eventually just stays there. The other half heads south and comes right down the west coast. It's called the California Current. So you tell me, should the feds be checking fish, especially in the weeks and months to come, or not? I think we all agree on the answer. Dr. Blaylock, anything to add to that?
Well, you're right, and their view is if you don't know, then you can say it's safe. They can say, well, we don't have any evidence that the fish is contaminated or any danger, and we think it's safe to eat. But the next question would be, well, did you measure the levels? Well, no. If we measure the levels, we can't make that statement. We see this time and again in every kind of disaster. It's just like in the Gulf of Mexico. What they say, we don't smell any oil in the
I remember.
seafood.
Yeah.
That's how the FDA tests it. Well, these things have no odor. So that way they can, without blatantly lie, say the FDA in their test found no problem.
Right, the VOCs are odorless. Right, they don't smell. And then, again, some of the seafood, in fact, did have oil inside, but they didn't find those samples.
Sure, they just scoop those under the table.
Right.
And look at the ones that don't have the high concentration oil. Well, the other cover-up with this radiation thing is every time I look at some of these statistics, it's not just they only count death from cancer, but they ignore all other radiation-related disorders. And if you know anything about radiation exposure, particularly chronic low-level radiation, the other problems you have is an increased birth defect. Now, when you look in Europe, particularly the western part of Europe, Norway, Sweden, Hungary, Czech Republic, you see a dramatic increase in birth defects in children that were born of parents during that period and are being born now. We see endocrine dysfunction. Even though the iodine 131 increases thyroid cancer, it also increases hypothyroidism and even hyperthyroidism. Pituitary dysfunction is very common without a pituitary tumor being formed. One of the big surprises to a lot of people is that radiation can readily cause atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. It can lead to heart failure and heart attacks, strokes. This is very well known. So there's a great number of disorders, chronic organ failure, kidney failure, lung failure, that can result from chronic exposure to radiation. It's not even going to enter into these statistics. They're just going to be written off as, well, this person just had a stroke, had a heart attack.
But it's gross plausible deniability right down the page.
Sure.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that concern me, is that when I look at these sites where everybody's claiming safety and that we're just a bunch of alarmists, they don't know the medical aspects of this. And they don't know how these statistics are being manipulated and doctored. The easiest thing to manipulate is a population study. And that's what all of these things are based on, population studies. People move in and out of populations. They know that. So it's hard to track disease rates. Now, when I looked at reports of doctors who traveled to Eastern Europe and Belarus, their story is quite different. In fact, one of the reporters said, if you want to see how many are dying in these areas from Chernobyl, just visit the graveyard. It's filled with the graves of babies and young children that all died, shortly after this event. Now, that's easily ignored by the media and by the government. Now, my interest in all of this, as I got to looking into it, is well, how do you protect yourself? Well, it's interesting right now. I'm seeing in Japan, they're telling people, well, don't eat vegetables. And the ironic thing is the flavonoids in the vegetables are the most potent radioprotectants. So even though the vegetables may accumulate some of the radiation, they also have the most powerful inhibitors of radiation damage.
No one has said that. I've never heard that before. Thank you. No.
You see, I wrote, I'll tell you about the e-book that I wrote on radiation protection called Nuclear Sunrise, which is a downloadable e-book. And in this, I researched all that's known about radio protection by natural substances. Well, NASA does most of the research in radio protection. And what they realized is all the drugs that had been created were so toxic they couldn't use them. And so they started looking at natural substances, flavonoids from plants, and garlic and ginkgo biloba and things like that. And what they discovered is that there's things in plants, these flavonoids, that are enormously powerful radioprotectants. For instance, ginkgo biloba has been shown to contain components that protect the DNA, the most sensitive part of it, of this radiation damage. Ginger not only protected the DNA, but it protected animals against massive exposure to gamma radiation, the most damaging of all.
Really? What kind of a dose a day are we talking about of ginkgo?
Well, we're talking about the doses that people take for health effects. 250, 360 milligrams a day.
And garlic?
And that gives significant radio protection. Curcumin, the extract from the spice turmeric, is an enormously powerful radioprotectant.
What about garlic, Dr. Blaylock?
Garlic is a very powerful radioprotectant. Quercetin, ellagic acid, pomegranate extract, which is very high in ellagic acid.
Alpha-lipoic acid?
Excuse me?
Alpha-lipoic acid?
Alpha-lipoic acid. In fact, that was one of the projects